What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was banished and became the beast of divine fury? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. They say that when you're about to die, your life flashes before your eyes. The good, the bad, the happy, the sad. Everything, even if you didn't want to see it. Maybe it was because your brain wanted you to see everything again, to maybe give you some sort of comfort or closure. Some happiness in your last moments before it was all taken from you by that white light. Maybe not. Maybe your brain has a jump start and remembers everything at once. The brain is a brilliant and complex thing. Even if you study it for a few lifetimes, you might not unlock everything it contains or fully understand how it works. However, there really is no way of truly knowing whether or not your life flashes before your eyes or if it's just the ramblings of some dying people. Despite all of this, different people experience different dying moments. Some want to pass without anything else, no white light, no memories. Some want all of that, to relive everything again before death takes them. For some reason the people that don't want to relive anything are forced to watch everything, all of their failures, the death of their loved ones, again and again, reminding them just, even with all of their power, how weak and pathetic they are. That was the case of one Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze as he lay there, floating above the ground, the 9 chakra dragons of the ghetto statue racing towards him, Madara and Sasuke staring down at his blooded and beaten form. He lay there helpless. After all, what was the point in fighting to defend a world of ruins and bad memories? The Fourth Shinobi World War led the world into a burning wasteland. Everyone was dead, everyone that ever mattered to Naruto. The loves of his life, his wives, Ino, Sakura, Hinata, Tenten, Anko, Mei, Kurenai, Yugao, Tamari and Samui, all dead at the hands of the Uchiha pair. Everyone was dead, only he and the 2 Uchiha remain, so, despite all of his training, all of his loved ones' sacrifices, he gave up. He allowed the 2 to take him with the words of, "If you want to rule over the ashes of this accursed world, then be my guest. Send me to my death so that I can see them all again." He truly seemed defeated, and that brought great joy to both Madara and Sasuke. They had finally broken the unbreakable ninja, destroyed his wolf fire and trod on the embers. He was nothing more than a husk. Or so they thought. It came as a great shock when, instead of Naruto being absorbed, the ghetto statue had its mouth forcefully opened and the tailed beasts within ripped out of it and pulled towards the 18-year-old ninja as he withered on the floor. Despite Sasuke and Madara's best efforts to stop this from happening, all it rewarded them was with the same treatment as the 8-tailed beasts, a one-way ticket to the body of Naruto, where they and the rest were absorbed into his very being. Naruto laid there, staring up at the cave ceiling. His body glowed a bright silver light, the energy of the 9-tailed beasts and the 2 strongest Uchiha simply too much for his body to handle. In the death-like state he was in, he didn't notice his eyes change from their azure blue that his wives loved so much to the crimson red of the combined form of Sasuke and Madara's eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, nor did he notice the strange silver chakra that wrapped around his still form like a cloak. He closed his eyes, letting the salty tears flow. He started off at a small wheezing breath that turned into a light giggle, then into a slight chuckle, then into a series of laughs, and then finally a full-bellied laugh that echoed in what would have been his tomb. After a little while, his laughter died down. He opened his back to blue eyes. He saw a white light above him, warm and welcoming, pulling him towards it. "I've finally done it," he whispered to himself. "I have finally avenged you, my loves. I'll be back with you all soon. There is so much we need to talk about." He closed his eyes again as his body imploded, sending out a shock wave that ripped his world to shreds along with a couple of the neighboring solar systems. All that was left were the drifting rocks of a destroyed planet. All caused by a stuck-up prick with a false grandeur of peace. However, among those drifting rocks was a small silver shell, no bigger than a house, that practically oozed power. And in that small shell, lay one young man that had gone through what most would in an entire lifetime. Inside the shell, untold amount of time later, when Naruto awoke, he was expecting to see his loved ones' smiling faces, or at least one of their faces, but instead all he saw was a grand white void that looked to go on forever. With a jolt, Naruto leapt up while reaching for a kunai to protect himself in case this was a trap set up by someone. However, when he reached down for his weapon he realized, with a start, that nothing was there, not even the pouch itself. Naruto narrowed his eyes as they unconsciously morphed into his newly acquired fully matured Sharingan, the red glowing in Tom spinning ominously in his sockets. He took the time to look around properly. Everything was white. There was no floor, no ceiling, no walls, just the endless void he found himself standing in. He suddenly spun around, his hand igniting in a show of sparks. Lightning sprung to life in his palm, reminiscent to the signature Chidori of Sasuke Uchiha. His hand left a trail behind him as the lightning made contact with the palm of another, stopping his dead. He felt fingers curl around his wrist and lock him there. What a rookie mistake, he yelled at himself, infuriated with his blunder. No matter how much he tugged with all his strength, his arm wouldn't budge a single inch. Now, Naruto-kun, the voice was heavenly as it engulfed Naruto and a warm embrace. Despite his best efforts he could feel his body slouch and calm, his muscle uncoil. Is that how you treat the one that saved you? Naruto could tell without looking that whoever this unknown female was had a mighty pout on her face. After being with Ino for little over 5 years he could pick up on the little hints. Now, she said, dragging Naruto out of his soft and loving remembrance, when I let go, you're not going to attack me, are you? Naruto could almost taste the amusement that leaked off her words and it pissed him off slightly, but he took a deep breath and nodded his confirmation. Good, she said with a giggle that sounded an awful lot like chimes and released him from her steel-like grasp. Naruto jumped forward to gain some distance and turned to look at the woman who not only able to sneak up behind him but also stopped his attack with little to no effort on her part. He, however, was not prepared for the vision of beauty before him. The woman had long sliver hair that reached all the way down to her knees, enticing golden eyes that sparkled with mischief and amusement, a cute button nose, elegant silver eyebrows and a soft face. Her skin was a glowing pale white, the same white as his beloved Hinata's skin. She was garbed in a tight white battle kimono that hugged her form tightly and hinted at her DD-cup breasts, trimmed with gold that went down to her mid-thigh. A golden sash hung loosely to her waist and went down to her white knee-length boots. Unknown location, unknown amount of time later. Naruto woke to the sound of soft humming, blinking the sleep out of his eyes. The first thing he noticed was that he was in a terribly soft bed. It was a hell of a lot softer than the bed in the master bedroom in the Namikaze estate, which was quite a surprise. Having thought there was nothing softer than that bed, God, he missed that bed. The second thing he noticed was the smell of something delicious as it took over his senses, making his mouth water. He stood out of the bed in a dead manner and followed his nose to the source of such a heavenly aroma. He didn't know how far he walked or what he walked past, but he didn't mind for some reason. He felt warm and safe. Just like how he did with his loved one, and it was a feeling he had missed for a long time. "Morning, Naruto-kun," called out that same voice from before, waking Naruto up completely. "How was your sleep?" Naruto looked around to see he was in a kitchen of some sort and the woman was sat at a table with 2 dishes of food in front of her and an empty seat across from where she was sat. "I know you more than likely have a lot of questions, but they can wait until after breakfast." She waved her hand out in a welcoming manner, her smile still plastered firmly on her face. "So please, sit, eat all that you need." She smiled warmly to Naruto, calming him again. Whatever it was about that smile just had this affect on him and he wasn't sure whether or not he liked it. Deciding not to anger the powerful woman, Naruto did as he was told. He was almost ruled by powerful women his whole life. He had never fought a stronger foe than female fury. After a surprisingly comfortably silent breakfast, Naruto sat, staring at the still smiling female across from him as she waited for Naruto's onslaught of questions with eyes closed. "Who are you?" Naruto finally asked after a little bit on prolonged silence. Deciding not to beat around the bush, never was his style anyway. The woman let out a small chuckle. "Straight to the point as always," she muttered to herself as she opened her eyes to look at Naruto dead in his own. "I am everything there ever was or ever will be. I am omnipotent. I am life and death, sun and moon. I am Kami." She finished her dramatic speech before adding, "But my friends call me Amiko," with giggle. Naruto looked at the so-called Kami in front of him with wide disbelieving eyes. "Are you okay? Did you hit your head as a child?" He seemingly teleported to her side, which given his skills, was highly possible, and started to look her over with a worried eye. "You can't be Kami," he finally declared with a giant and proud smile, as if he had solved the greatest mystery ever. He however was sent flying back when Emiko was surrounded by a great golden glow that lashed out and struck the building around the pair. He hair shadowed her eyes as she spoke in a tone that made Naruto quake in his boots. Naruto-kun, that wasn't very nice. She slowly stalked forward to the shaking form of Naruto. Saying I have brain damage, she tutted disappointingly, shaking her head, sending her silver waterfall behind her swishing left and right. For someone who had 10 wives, I would have thought you'd know how to talk to women. She looked at him, her eyes glowing with power, more than Naruto had ever felt in his life. Despite what you may think, I am Kami and I have come here to talk to you about a deal. She lowered her power output, allowing Naruto to move and breathe normally again, and made her way back to her seat. Her eyes stared at Naruto expectantly, and he was quick to bolt to his seat and listen to the woman. Even if she wasn't Kami, that power was insane. Emiko smiled and nodded approvingly as she opened her mouth to speak. Right before we get down to the deal, I have a news for you, both good and sadly bad. Which would you like first? She looked at his almost apologetically. He was going to find this hard to take. Emiko sighed when he shrugged his shoulders, not really caring too much. Well, let's start with the good news, yeah? She tried to give him a smile, but it seemed weaker than her normal warm and happy ones. The old Jubi is dead and is near going to be able to come back, along with Sasuke and Madara. She tried to sound cheerful, she really did. Naruto nodded with a smile, so his plan had worked after all. Now that was a relief, but he picked up on one word in that sentence that just screamed foreboding to him: old. He thought to himself, what the hell does she mean by old? There was a feeling at the back of his head and at the pit of his stomach. Emiko took a deep breath as she closed her eyes, trying to find a way to word her next sentence with sending the maelstrom off. I'm sure you picked up my wording of old, and I will tell you that it was not a slip of the tongue. She opened her eyes to look at Naruto once again. When you absorbed all of the tailed beasts into your body, they all formed into the Jubi inside of you and tried to overpower you and take body. Your willpower was stronger, however, and you ended up absorbing the 10 tails and anything else that was inside you at that moment. So, you are the new Jubi, she finished with an awkward laugh as she threw her hands up in the air, confetti falling down on the two. Congratulations, Emiko trailed off sadly. Naruto barred his head into his hands. The Jubi was a primordial beast, as strong as the gods and goddesses. Primordial beasts don't just die, they live on forever, never aging, and if they ever did die in battle, then they would just be reformed a few centuries later. So if his guess was right that he was immortal, undying, unaging, stuck in this body doomed to never die and see his loved ones again. Just as the tears started to flow down his face, he noticed what she said in that sentence as well. Wait, what do you mean, anything else that was inside me? I only absorbed the tailed beasts, right? He almost said pleadingly, uncaring about the tears flowing down his cheeks and how weak they made him look. Emiko shuffled nervously on the set she was sitting on, refusing to look at Naruto as he almost glared at her. Well, she started before mumbling the rest under her breath. When Naruto's glare intensified, his eyes turning into the Sharingan of Madara and Sasuke, she spoke louder this time. Madara and Sasuke tired to stop you and ended up being absorbed into you as well. You've gained everything they had, their skills in fire style and lightning style jutsu, even their Sharingan. She finished with a huff as Naruto slumped back and let out a defeated sigh. This was ridiculous. Naruto shook his head and rubbed his temples. He let out a sigh of exasperation and looked at Emiko with tired and defeated eyes. Earlier, you said something about a deal? He trailed off expectingly. Emiko nodded with a smile. Hopefully this would cheer him up. Yes, indeed I did. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, who would you like to go back in time to your 6th birthday and do everything differently? She giggled when Naruto looked at her with hope and excitement. I thought so. Well then. After I have trained you so that your new powers don't destroy you or anyone close to you, I will send you back. You have my word, she declared with a determined and strong voice. But, she continued, interrupting Naruto before he could say anything, this training will be long and hard, might even take a few centuries or millennium before I deem you good enough to go back, and you also might have to possibly to going to different universes to help or fix any problems there. Do you agree? She questioned firmly. Naruto took almost no time to think. If he was stuck as the 10 tails, then he might as well make the most of it. So with that in mind he swallowed his pride and was about to get onto his knees before Emiko stopped him with a hand on his chin. He looked up into the sea of molten gold that was her eyes. He smiled a foxy grin, his eyes alive again. "You have my word, Emiko-chan, I will have this training done within this century, that's a promise," he declared with his usually determined and happy tone. He, however, couldn't help but shiver and gulp at the sadistic look in her eyes and the dark grin on her full, pink lips. Maybe him saying that wasn't such a good idea. The Void, 98 years later. It had been a long almost century and Naruto had done everything to keep his promise to Emiko about completing his training with the allotted time. The results were astounding, if there really was any way to describe Naruto growth. Emiko smiled as she thought back on the past years that pasted way too fast for her liking. She stared out at Naruto as he went through his last set of taijutsu sets. 98 years, a full lifetime for most but a blink of an eye for immortals. However, for Naruto, it was enough to learn what was needed. Also, with the addition of Kage Bunshin and its memory feedback system, it was more along the lines of a millennia or two. More than enough time for him to learn almost everything Emiko was going to teach him. Being the new Jubi, or God Tree if you wanted to be technically, Naruto was the new progenitor of chakra and all of its different forms. Like all of the Kekkei Genkei and chakra natures, like fire release, wind release, water release, earth release, lightning release, boil release, crystal release, dark release, shadow release, light release, ice release and so forth. Naruto would admit that he was stronger in some elements than he was in others and more than likely never use all of them, but it was nice to have them stored up just in case. Today's the day, Emiko thought to herself with dismay. Today was the day where she would have to send Naruto back in time and separate from him for an untold amount of time. She had no illusions that she would not see him again at all, but that would have to wait for a while. It was going to be weird, having spent so much time with the blonde-haired pseudo-god. To have him leave, but she would take comfort in the fact that he was going back to correct all of the wrongs he could. Still, having grown fond of the blonde, she was going to miss his company immensely. She sighed, walking up to the blonde, taking the time to admire how much he had changed. He stood at his full-grown height of 6 feet 3 inches, a fact of which he was proud of considering he was always picked on for his height when he was younger. His long yellow and sliver hair still spiked in every direction but went down to his jaw, reminiscent of his father's hairstyle. Azure blue eyes that sparkled like the ocean when he was happy but could become a deadly crimson red and black when enraged. It had taken a while, but Naruto was proud of owning and his mastery over the Sharingan and all of its abilities, having much more mastery over it than Sasuke and Madara ever would. Even the Kamui, which was a surprise seeing as neither of the Uchiha had that, but seeing as every Kekkei Genkei including the 3 legendary dojutsu, Sharingan, Rinnegan and the Byakugan, it wasn't too far-fetched to imagine he would receive all of its powers. Naruto had once said the Kamui was his favorite Mangekyo Sharingan technique, followed by Susanoo, then the Black Flames of Amaterasu and finally Tsukuyomi. He would never learn Koto Amatsukami, finding it disguising along with anyone that would use it. Emiko continued her ogling, observing of Naruto as he took off his shirt to wipe his forehead. His tight and compact muscles twitching and flexing at even a slight movement. He put his black form-fitting shirt back on, secretly disappointing Emiko, and grabbed his cloak that he had made with his mastery over yin-yang release and creation of all things. He was dressed in his usual attire, which consisted of his usual Konoha forehead protector, a high collar and short-sleeved black cloak that had silvery flames licking the bottom and the kanji of 10-tailed wolf sewn on his back in the same silver as the flames. His chest was protected by what looked like standard issue Anbu Black Ops armor, only a darker color, but was much stronger than anything they could ever produce. Emiko doubted that Naruto would ever be hurt by anything in his old world, but it always paid to be cautious and prepared. An orange sash was wrapped around his waist, going down to his knees. No matter what she said, he would always wear orange. It was the color of the gods. Literally. Halfway through their training, Emiko suggested that Naruto should learn how to use a sword or a weapon similar just in case. So she called in a favor to one of her friends, and before long, Naruto was the proud owner of a pitch-black katana with red rubies along its hilt and a chain coming out of the bottom, opening up a lot of different types of possibilities. Naruto had named it Zangetsu as soon as he first held it in his grasp, and to this day he could have sworn he felt the sword rumble and purr when he named it such. Said sword almost never left his side, and if it did, he could call it back to him or near him with just a thought. Emiko was still confused how that worked, but Naruto said he had to keep some secrets to draw in the ladies. She was undeniably pissed off at that, but decided not to kill him and instead beat the ever-living crap out of him in his next sparring session with her. Not that she could just push him around anymore, as he could give her a good run for her money nowadays, but it felt good to beat the hell out of him when he was still a weak baby Primordial. If there ever is such a thing. Anyway, finishing off his look was some black Anbu Black Ops pants with a silver strip down the left side, some steel-toed boots and black fingerless gloves that went up to his elbows with metal plates on the back, seals for all of his necessary equipment on the back of his hand. He never knew why he refused Fuin Jutsu training from Pervy Sage, it was such a useful skill to have. And because of his Uzumaki blood, he was able to understand and replicate seals at a much faster rate than most shinobi could ever dream. Emiko swallowed her sadness with a dry throat and put up a smile. She knew he would tell it was fake as soon as he saw it, but she had to try and at least seem happy. She walked over to Naruto with the grace of a dancer, as Naruto had once said, and stopped not too far from him, her arms crossed under her bust automatically. Naruto sighed, having detected Emiko as she got close along with her sadness. While he was excited about the fact that today was the day he was going to back and change everything and see his beloved wives again, he was also upset about leaving Emiko. However, it wasn't like he wasn't going to see her ever again, so that stopped his sadness from going too far. He walked up to the silent goddess and wrapped his arms around her waist, to which she just rested her head on his chest without saying a word. After a few moments of silence, Naruto spoke. Now, he said to her, just like she said to him all those years ago. This is no time for tears. He grasped at her cheek and tilted her head up so his blue eyes could meet her golden orbs, whipping her tears with his thumb as he held her face between his hands. Naruto rested his forehead against hers, feeling the warmth through the metal between them. This isn't goodbye, more of a, I'll see you later, he whispered to her, his hot breath washing over her face. Naruto took a step back, flashing her his foxy grin and a cheeky salute. His eyes shone with affection, and with a nod, he vanished in a flash of light, back to his past to hopefully better everyone's future. Emiko whipped her eyes with a small laugh. Naruto would always be Naruto, and that entailed making all of his friends feel better. He just wouldn't be Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze as he didn't. Still, Emiko thought to herself with a shake of her head. I'm gonna miss that blonde baka, and with that she teleported away to where she was meant to be. Dear God, the paperwork that had no doubt piled up over the years were going to kill her. So the two left, the strange white shell still floating to destinations unknown in the vast darkness that is space. Not like that would have any repercussions, right? Konohagakure no Sato, year 156 AGF, after the Great Founding. Naruto's eyes snapped open as he jolted up with a start. He looked around with analytical eyes and took everything in. The lumpy bed, the dirty walls, messy floor, and the ramen poster above his head. He breathing grew shaky as he looked out of the window to his left above his bed, and what he saw made his eyes water with joy. The village, his home in one piece. People went about their business while greeting the others as they passed. Everything seemed so peaceful, such a vast contrast to the burning crater full of bodies of the villagers and shinobi when he had last seen it. Naruto fell back against his pillow with a happy and cheerful smile. I had worked. He really was back. He would change everything and make sure that this time his world would not fall into such disarray as his last one. He could finally see his Heims again. Wait, Naruto thought as he sat up stiffly. They don't love me yet and the village hates me aga, and he hung his head, his eyes shadowed by his usual spiky golden mess of hair. And I'm 6 years old again. I'm going to have to train my body to the extreme to get back to where I was before. He clenched his hand and unclenched it rhythmically. Well, at least I still have all of my chakra and 10 tails yokai along with everything I have learned, so that's a bonus. His head raised slowly, his normally blue eyes glowing red underneath his blonde bags as they spun hypothetically, a foxy grin on his lips. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, the 10-tailed wolf and Rokudemi Hokage, was back and ready to smash everything Madara had set up and planed to pieces. But first, he had to gain the respect of his village again. How hard could that be? Konohagakure no Sato, year 156 AGF, after the great founding. Naruto's eyes snapped open as he jolted up with a start. He looked around with analytical eyes and took everything in. The lumpy bed, the dirty walls, messy floor and the ramen poster above his head. His breathing grew shaky as he looked out of the window to his left above his bed, and what he saw made his eyes water with joy. The village, his home in one piece. People went about their business while greeting the others as they passed. Everything seemed so peaceful, such a vast contrast to the burning crater full of bodies of the villagers and shinobi when he had last seen it. Naruto fell back against his pillow with a happy and cheerful smile. I had worked. He really was back. He would change everything and make sure that this time his world would not fall into such disarray as his last one. He could finally see his Heims again. Wait, Naruto thought as he sat up stiffly. They don't love me yet and the village hates me aga, and he hung his head, his eyes shadowed by his usual spiky golden mess of hair. And I'm 6 years old again. I'm going to have to train my body to the extreme to get back to where I was before. He clenched his hand and unclenched it rhythmically. Well, at least I still have all of my chakra and 10 tails yokai along with everything I have learned, so that's a bonus. His head raised slowly, his normally blue eyes glowing red underneath his blonde bags as they spun hypothetically, a foxy grin on his lips. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, the 10-tailed wolf and Rokudemi Hokage, was back and ready to smash everything Madara had set up and planed to pieces. But first, he had to gain the respect of his village again. How hard could that be? Cage Mountain, 6 years later. The Hokage Mountain overlooked the whole of the village. It was a towering monument to all of the leaders on the village. Naruto often liked to come here and stand on the rock head of Yondaime Hokage, Minato Namikaze, and his father, to just think or stand in the silence. The soft wind that seemed to always blow up there making his cloak flutter in the wind. With his hairstyle and clothing, most would mistake him for a small Minato. Which is where we find him now, reflecting on how his trip to the past had been so far, shining his sword, Zenjutsu, with a delicate and caring hand. The past 6 years had surprisingly been good to Naruto. While not up to full physical power, he estimated that he could at least go toe-to-toe with Might Guy in a taijutsu match so long as he didn't open up 2 of the 8 gates that increase both speed and power to a frightening level. There was no real way of knowing with actually trying, something Naruto was actually giddy about. The main cause of his growth was because of weight, gravity and resistance seals he had placed on his limbs and back, along with his incredible recovery rate, allowing him to just train for hours on end. He was also able to adapt his body to handle at least 6 tails, unless he went into his Jubi form, where he could use all 10, which was a giant silver wolf but was too big to be practical in most situations. His yokai-shrouded form looked a lot like when he went Kyuubi's chakra mode but was colored silver and looked overall more wolf-like than anything else. On a side note, 6 tails of his yokai was the equivalent to 27 tails of power from Kurama, the Kyuubi. Speaking of the 9-tailed fox, when Naruto went into his mindscape he found, to his surprise and sadness, that the great fox demon was not there. Which begs the question of where the great demon was. He had the idea that he had absorbed Kurama when he had returned, but he was sure he would have felt such a power boost, maybe not, but still. Not knowing was unsettling. Despite coming back to the past at an age where most of the village either hated or despised him, Naruto was able to change their views one by helping around the village and being generally nice to the villager. Whoever did almost nothing for the shinobi portion by it was a start. While a large portion of the village still held him at arm's length, the glares and whispers lessened. He was still dead last at the academy, mainly because he wanted to show off when the genin test came. Boy, he couldn't wait for the look on their faces when the dead last beat the last loyal Uchiha. That was another thing that he was a bit sore on. Naruto had never known when the destruction of the Uchiha clan, or the dubbed Uchiha incident, took place exactly, and when he was made aware of the rapidly decreasing chakra signatures, it was already too late. To this day, he was still disappointed with himself and it pushed him harder than ever. The only thing he was able to change about that horrible night was that he allowed himself to be closer to Sasuke, to try and not let him fall to darkness. Not matter how much he wanted to hate the Uchiha that had killed many of his wives in his past life, He had yet to actually do anything bad in this timeline. If he did hate him, then he would be no better than the villagers that hated him when he was a child. He would never allow himself to ever stoop that low. He was still an arrogant and pretentious spoiled brat that got everything handed to him because of his last name. Naruto sighed as the cloth his was using in sword cleaning kit vanished with a puff of smoke, sealing them into his own pocket dimension located on his right hand. Standing up to his full height of 5 feet 6 inches, tall for his age, Naruto let the wind brush against his face, making his hair sway in the wind along with his cloak. He closed his eyes with a soft smile. His hymes were alive. Hinata had more confidence in herself, and both Ino and Sakura had taken their training seriously after a lot of probing from him after he became friends with them at a younger age than he did last time. They didn't even have a crush on the handsome Sasuke. Thank God, or is it Kami? Or even Emiko? Yeah, who cares, thank whoever it is. Today is the day where I can finally show off, Naruto thought to himself with giddy excitement, although he was calm and collected on the outside. I'm gonna miss that old jumpsuit, I don't care what anyone said. I looked awesome in that, plus I rocked that orange. True, when he came back to the past, he took the first chance he could to find his old and beloved orange and blue jumpsuit. However, ever since he became friends with Sakura and Ino, they had been trying to make him change out of his for a while, and when they said, "People will look down on your awesome ninja skills. Plus if you could pull off all of this pranks in bright, kill me orange, then your stealth skills will be amazing in black or a darker color." So here he was wearing the same clothing he had made when he was training with Emiko for the first time in 6 years, per his Hyme's request. That was another thing he couldn't wait for. The look on their faces when he appears at the academy today will be priceless. The academy that he was late for. Oh crap, thought Naruto as his eyes snapped open in alarm, panic all over his face. Academy starts at 9:30 a.m. The time right now is 9:26 and I have to cross a 2 kilometers gap in 4 minutes. Easy, Naruto smirked as he stepped closer to the edge of the cliff while sticking Zenjutsu with chakra, the hilt peeking over his right shoulder. Taking a deep breath, Naruto took a calm and casual step forward. Right off the edge of Hokage Mountain and to the streets below. The people that saw the young Jubi plummet to the ground gasped, easily recognizing his golden hair, despite the distance. Even the people that hated him couldn't help but shout their shook. While they may resent him or the monster they think he still contains, they never wanted the boy to kill himself. Mothers wrapped their children in a hug, telling them to look away while most just watched in horror as the village ball of sunshine seemingly gave into the pressure. Naruto fell with his arms and legs spread, slowing his descent with a foxy grin on his face. He narrowed his eyes playfully as he put his arms to his sides and angled himself downward, shooting down like a rocket. He became nothing but a blur to the onlooking villagers, making their eyes wide with wonder and confusion. Just as he was about to crash into the ground and make the village square a bloody mess, he flipped in midair, slowing his fall as he landed on his feet with a not a sound, kicking up dust and dirt with his knees bent and head downward, hair covering his eyes. The square was silent as the men and women looked at him with shook. The children, however, almost yelled out in awe and wonder at the super cool ninja stuff, completely amazed at Naruto's seemingly death-defying move that most full-grown shinobi wouldn't dare try. Naruto raised his head, showing his eyes practically glowing with amusement and challenge, his leg muscles coiled like a spring. He chuckled at the looks sent his way by the nearby villagers, having a small flashback of his life before this one and the looks kids would send him then. He shot forward at high Junin level speeds, becoming a blur of black, silver and orange to even most Junin but vanishing from sight for anyone below. The villagers didn't know what happened. One moment they were looking at a crouched new and improved Naruto, then suddenly, he disappeared. There was a gust of wind that passed them, almost knocking them off their feet. Laughter dancing on the wind that passed them. Naruto took to the roofs, hopping from building to building, his black and silver cloak billowing behind him. He grabbed a low-hanging metal bar and swung himself up higher, sticking his feet to a nearby wall, the academy in sight. He couched down low, preparing for a mighty leap. He flung himself high into the air, aiming for a conveniently open window. Naruto plunged forward, taking a dive down for his goal. Just as Naruto passed the threshold, he curled himself into a ball and rolled of a few seconds before standing to his full height, showing his new look off. His cloak and sash flapped in the non-existent wind, along with his golden and silver-tipped hair, creating quite the awe-inspiring scene. Naruto looked to the front class to see his teacher for the past 3 years, Iruka Amino, a chunin of 7 years, himself being 23 years old. Standing with a clipboard, his mouth agape like he was about to talk and eyes wide with surprise when he looked at the intruder of his class. Naruto sent his sensei a foxy grin that made the girls of the class swoon as he rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "Hey Iruka-sensei," he spoke in the silent room, his voice laced with a barely hidden amusement, making the aforementioned sensei snap out of his shock-induced daze. "I'm not late, am I?" he asked with his foxy grin growing in size when he saw Iruka's face flush red with rage as he grew a tick mark on his forehead. Naruto had the sudden impulse to cover his ears, like a lot of students did, when Iruka opened his mouth and took a deep breath. The following shout of "Yubaka!" shaking the very foundations of the building, almost blowing Naruto away with the force. Naruto looked at the overhead clock, seeing if he made it or not. 9:31, he thought to himself in false despair, something that quick turned into determination. "Just means I have more training to do," he declared mentally, proud of himself. While he could have just taken off his seals and gotten here with time to spare, where was the fun in that? His thoughts were interrupted when a fist came crashing down onto the top of his head, sending him to the floor with a crash and a giant steaming lump where he was hit. Classic Iruka-sensei. He managed to slip out before his head fell limp to the wooden floor of his class for the past 6 years. In the class a few minutes before, Iruka Amino sat at his desk with a smile on his face. "Today's the day," he thought as well watched the last few of his students to come in and take a seat, ready for the genin exam, ready to become full-fledged shinobi and kunoichi, ready to take on the Konohagakure forehead protector and protect their village and homes. "I am blessed with the honor of teaching a class so full of potential." Even Naruto Uzumaki, he thoughts turned affectionate as his mind drifted to the blonde aspiring Hokage. Where is Naruto anyway? He better not be late or else, he threatened as a dark feeling oozed out of him, making a few students shudder at the feeling. Hinata Hyuga sat at the back of the class near the window, looking out at the happy families as they dropped off their kids. She was rather beautiful for her age, with long Oxford Blueheim-style haircut that went down to her waist at the back along with 2 strands that framed her flawless face, breathtaking pupil-less lavender eyes and lovely snow-white skin complexion. Her shy and lack of self-confidence had been nipped at the bud, leaving a strong and firm but still caring and polite young woman behind. She used to wear clothes that would cover her rapidly developing body to hide from stares, but ever since Naruto had told her to believe in herself and in her looks, she wore clothes that complemented her body perfectly. Her normal outfit was a gray sleeveless shirt that looked a lot like a series of wrappings. The whole shirt clung to her body, showing her amazing curves and developing C-cup breast, big for her age, and black skin-tight pants that hugged her long slender legs perfectly. Unlike most ninja who wore open-toed shoes, she wore a light gray armored boots that went up to her knees. Think Mei's boots. Overall, she looked just as deadly as she did beautiful. With the title and position of Hyuga heiress and her beauty, she could get anyone she wanted, but her mind was solely dedicated to the one person that never looked down on her and was there for her when no one else was. He was the person she adored more than anyone else. His golden hair, his foxy grin, just everything about him was perfect to her. "Where are you, Naruto-kun?" Hinata thought in worry as she looked out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of his bright blonde hair, azure blue eyes that pulled her in and made her feel warm, loved and appreciate. Wow. She has it bad. She wasn't the only one that had it bad for the blonde Primordial though, because 2 of her classmates and best female friends felt more or less the same as she did when it came to the devilishly handsome future Hokage. The 2 young girls, one with platinum blonde hair, Ino, and the other pink, Sakura, burst through the door loudly, attracting the attention of everyone in the room. They dropped to the ground with a startled cry. They jumped up, both looking at the other triumphantly. After Sakura got over her insecurity about her forehead with the help of Naruto, she grew into a truly breathtaking young woman with long pink waist-length hair that went over her right eye, though the left one was left out, showing a lovely emerald green. Her hair was braided around the back from temple to temple, long bags framing her pretty face with a cute button nose, full eyelashes and pink lips, her skin a lovely creamy color. Her attire was of strange style that she personally wanted. She had a fishnet shirt that, just like Hinata, stopped just above her navel and went to her elbows, along with a red top above her fishnet armor that went around her left shoulder. She had red gloves in the style of hand wraps, leaving her fingers and knuckles bare. A pair of fishnet shorts that ended just before her knees with a red sash that hung between her legs to her shins. Her outfit was topped off with knee-length red high-heel boots with gray shin and knee plates. She was the second member of the new princesses of Konoha. For a look on what she is based on, I will give a link at the bottom in the AN. She gave Ino a victory's smirk as she pumped her fist. "Take that, Ino pig," she yelled out with a playfully mocking, joyful and soft voice. "I get to sit next to Naruto-kun today." She stuck her tongue out at her friend in an attempt to get a rise out of the gossip queen of Konoha. Ino Yamanaka had always been a confident and outgoing girl, part of her charm in Naruto's opinion, who took great pride when it came to her body and hair. With long platinum blonde locks worn in a ponytail that went down to her knees, along with a large chin-length bag that had a tendency to cover her right eye and a purple clip on the left of her head, keeping most of the bags out of her face. Peach and cream fair skin, light mint green eyes are her most alluring features. Just like Sakura, her clothing wasn't the most normally seen style, but they suited her perfectly, in her friends, Naruto's and her own opinion. Ino wore a dark purple armor-plated chest piece that stopped just below her developing breasts and a cloth of the same color wrapping around her back and covering her neck. Fishnet sleeves that go from her wrist to juts above her elbow on both arms, along with a fingerless glove on her right hand for grip on her kunai or weapon of choice. She wore a gray battle skirt underneath a purple two-tailed piece cape that started on her waist. It was connected to her chest piece with a series of steel hoops on her sides. Ino wrapped medical tape around her thigh and fishnet wraps that started just above her knees and stopped somewhere in the middle of her shins. To finish off her seductive and alluring, despite her age, look, she had purple raised high heels, which was normally a stupid idea when most ninja climb trees and such, but she made it work somehow. She was the third and final member of the new princesses of Konoha, which was rapidly changing to the 3 ice princesses because just like the 4 ice queens, they would reject any and all males that asked them out and tended to only hang out with each other or Naruto. Just like with Sakura, if you want a better look on what I based her clothes on, I will leave a link in the AN at the bottom. Ino narrowed her left uncovered eye at Sakura with playful anger as she shook her fist at the pink-haired girl. "That's what you think, billboard brow?" Her voice was a playful and seductive purr as she crossed her arms while flicking her hair over her shoulder with slightly fake inness. "I had at least a whole toe ahead of you, so I get to sit next to Naruto-kun today." She stuck her tongue out while pulling down her eyelid in a childish display. Both ignored the numerous date requests sent their way by the male student body as they bickered between each other. Deciding that they had bickered enough, Hinata, the head princess of the 3, spoke up. "Ino-chan, Sakura-chan, everyone stop talking," as the soft but strong voice of the Hyuga princess spoke up without looking at them. "Naruto-kun isn't even here yet. Just sit down before Iruka-sensei yells at you." She spoke with a soft smile that caused many of the guys to gain hearts for eyes and blushes on their faces. Ino and Sakura both looked around the room for the flash of gold and orange that was Naruto Uzumaki. They were, however, disappointed when it failed to appear. "Is Naruto-kun late?" Sakura thought out loud in worry as she and Ino made their way up the stairs to Hinata. Ino crossed her arms as she walked beside Sakura. "That baka better not be." She huffed while turning her head to the side. "He said that he's gonna stop holding back today and show everyone who exactly helped us train to become the strongest females of our year." Anger at the blonde quickly melted into excitement at the aspect of hopefully seeing Naruto actually get serious. Both her and Sakura sighed dreamily when they thought about the amazing blonde that showed them the value of training and not dieting, and the result clearly showed with their toned stomach and arms. To their parents, they looked like full-fledged kunoichi without the headband. Even Hinata's dad couldn't help but admit that she was worthy of the title of the Hyuga clan heiress. One of the more braver fanboys with brown hair, dark slitted eyes, red fang marks, a gray hoodie and brown pants along with an average face and white puppy sat on his head, stood up, having enough of their talk about Naruto. "Why do you even care about the dead last anyway? There are so many other boys who actually deserve to have your attention," he thumbed his chest with a wry and arrogant smile, completely oblivious to the dark and threatening aura that surrounded the three girls that heard him. "Like me, I'm much better than that lose," he yelped out in pain as he was sent flying into a wall by female fury, making spider web cracks where he impacted across the room by a wicked left hook from a furious Sakura, who stood there covered in a shroud of fire and flames for eyes, Ino next to her in the same shape as Sakura. Sakura narrowed her eyes at the dazed boy as he slowly gathered himself. "How dare you?" she growled out with gritted teeth, her eyes alight with flames of anger. "Naruto-kun is not a dead last." She humped with annoyance as she crossed her arms in front of her and jerked her head to the side in disgust, sending her pink waterfall of her whirling around. Making her way up the stairs in silence as Ino glared at the down boy with rage. She was just about to turn away, but not before getting in her own little word in. And besides, she turned her back to Kiba as if washing her hand of him. She looked back at him with a condescending smile. "Naruto-kun is so much better than a lousy mutt like you, Kiba. He could beat you and anyone in here any day of the week. Remember that," she snapped warningly as she walked up to sit next to Sakura, who had placed herself next to Hinata at the top. Ino sat down with a huff next to her childhood friend. "Can you believe that, Teme?" she almost yelled out while cracking her knuckles menacingly, to her friends who giggled at her actions. "Calm down, Ino-chan," giggled Hinata as she covered her mouth with her hand like Noble would, looking at her fuming friend. "Naruto-kun will be flattered that you think so highly of him, though." She took on a mock-thinking pose with her finger on her chin as she tapped rhythmically. She looked at Sakura, seemingly ignoring Ino's rosy face, but both she and Sakura could see the mirth in Hinata's whitey lavender eyes. "Should we tell him, Sakura-chan? He would be so happy to know his Inoheim defended him." She leaned into the pink-haired girl as she struggling to keep her laughter in, and whispered loud enough for the now scarlet Ino to hear. "Maybe he will give her a big kiss, like a prince would a princess's." She and Sakura broke out into loud laughter as steam poured out of Ino's ears. Images of hot kissing action filling her head, blood trickling out her nose. All noise was stopped as a black and silver blur shot through the open window and came to a stop at the front of the class. Iruka was quick to stand up and grab a kunai, ready to defend the class or hold off an enemy. Almost everyone gasped when they noticed the signature gold and silver hair of one Naruto Uzumaki in the style of the Namikaze Hokage. Naruto stood to his true height of 5 feet 6 inches, his hair a new black with silver flames cloak, reminiscent of the fourth Hokage's, swayed softly in the non-existent wind. Iruka put away his kunai but held onto his clipboard, having been getting ready to call the register. He, however, could keep his jaw open or his eyes normal when he figured out who it was and who he looked like. "Hey Iruka-sensei," his voice was more mature and charming, its childlike allure gone. "I'm not late, am I?" Naruto sent Iruka a foxy grin as he rubbed the back of his head. Iruka absent-mindedly took note of a few girls squealing and the far-off sounds of 3 different giggles followed by thuds. Iruka's hand started to shake as he looked down, his hair covering his eyes' fro view. His face turned red as a vein pulsed on his face in rage. His head expanded a few times in his infamous big head jutsu as he shouted, "You baka!" and brought his fist down on his more or less little brother's head. Now, the whole class just watched the byplay with shock and stunned faces. Most admiring his new look, it was defiantly better than that stupid orange, kill me now, jumpsuit. Some were wondering where he got his sword from and if he could use it. A few select girls passed out from blood loss when they saw just how handsome he looked now, along with how his shirt clung to his upper body, showing his compact and tight muscles. His looks even outclassed Sasuke's. The main 3 that passed out were Ino Yamanaka, Sakura Haruno and Hinata Hyuga, Naruto's closest friends. Each with their own little perverse thoughts at seeing Naruto's transformation. Naruto laughed when he saw them laid out on the floor with blood running down their noses and happy smiles on their faces, letting out an occasional perverted giggle. Just like he thought they would react because all his Heims had reacted the same way in his past life, it was always comforting to have this affect on his Heims. It told him that they were at least attracted to him physically. Naruto walked up the stairs towards the 3, passing the glaring Sasuke and sent him a glare back. "Hey dead last," called out the arrogant voice of Kiba Inuzuka, wanting to gain some of the pride he had lost from the brutal punch Sakura had dealt him earlier. Just because you look like a shinobi now doesn't mean you are one. He crossed his arms while sending Naruto a fanged grin, his elongated fangs appearing over his bottom lip, waiting for the response he knew was coming from the easily tempered Naruto. Kiba was surprised, as was most of the class, when the blonde Jubi chuckled merrily at the Inuzuka clan hair. No, it doesn't, but power and skill does. He sent Kiba a foxy grin of his own as his eyes shone with amusement, both of which I have in spades. This sword aren't for show, you know. He laughed at the stunned looks that were sent his way by everyone bar Hinata, as Ino and Sakura were still a bit out of it. The Hyuga princess sent him a warm and happy smile when he returned to her, making pretty pink appear on her moon-white skin. Naruto sat down next to a sleeping student, Shikamaru Nara, clarified Naruto as he looked at one of his closet male friends, right after Rock Lee and right before, believe it or not, Neji Hyuga after he was able to get him out of his fate and destiny crap. Ino and Sakura snapped out of their own little world as Naruto sat down and started to listen to Haruka as he called out names from his brood. Naruto had told them that he was getting a wardrobe change finally, but kept it a secret from them as a surprise. All three of the ice princesses would agree that it was well worth the wait, mainly because of the way it would cling to his muscular torso, and hinted at his godly and drool-worthy, for his age, physique. Wow, breathed Ino as she looked at the back of Naruto's head. What an improvement, she whispered to an equally stunned Sakura, both missing Naruto's shoulders shake with suppressed laughter. Hinata, however, didn't, as she too had to cover her mouth and turn her head to the side to hide her amusement. Sakura nodded in agreement, also staring at Naruto's golden locks. Yeah, Naruto-kun looks so handsome now, much better than his stupid orange jumpsuit. Naruto's shoulders suddenly stopped shaking as Hinata and Ino looked at Sakura with shock and horror. Naruto slowly raised from his seat and turned to look at the wide-eyed Sakura, his face blank. How dare you, he whispered in a quiet voice that made most near him shiver, insult the godly color of orange. Naruto leaned over so he was almost face to face with the sweating form of Sakura, but she sat there unmoving while looking Naruto in the eye with a firm resolve, strong in her opinion. Both stared at the other in a tense silence. Suddenly, Naruto broke out in a happy smile, making everyone breathe a sigh of relief as the feeling in the air was lifted. It's nice to hear that I look handsome to you though, he whispered to her, his hot breath brushing across her face, making her blush a lovely shade of red. Naruto chuckled at the look on her face, taking great joy in his effect on her. Just as he was about to sit back down, the person in front of him stood up, telling a story to his friends, knocking into Naruto. Time froze when Naruto realized what was happening, and there was nothing that he could really do to stop the motion without grabbing a handful of Sakura's body. She seemed to realize this too as her eyes widened with a multitude of emotions. Ino and Hinata watched as Naruto slowly fell towards the frozen-in-place Sakura. Ino's eyes narrowed at the hidden look of happiness on Sakura's face. Hinata just shook her head with a soft smile. This all seemed terribly set up to her. Almost like there was someone setting these things up. Sakura couldn't help but look into Naruto's eyes as his face closed the distance. Move, she yelled to herself, willing her body to follow her orders. You want this, don't kid yourself, she heard her inner voice. But Naruto-kun will think that this was only an accident and brush it off. I wanted to give it to him on a date or something. Not like this. She mentally panicked as the space between Naruto and herself decreased down to mere inches. Too late, replied inner Sakura in a sing-song voice as Naruto connected with Sakura. Right on the lips. Both Naruto and Sakura froze up as the class watched on in shock and horror as the dead last locked lips with the pink princess of the ice princesses. Sakura's mind shut down as Naruto's natural musk and unique scent of forest pine and mint flooded her body, his soft but firm lips covering her own. Her eyes slowly closed on their own accord as she unconsciously leaned into the kiss, burying her hands in his surprisingly soft gold and silver locks, deepening the unintentional embrace of lips. Naruto moaned out in surprise as a pair of arms dragged his head down into the kiss. He didn't fight as their lips moved in perfect sync. The smell of Sakura's cherry, just like her namesake, shampoo filled Naruto's nose. He ran his hands through her long, silky and soft hair, hearing her moan out at the affectionate act. The sweet taste of honey and strawberries, one of her favorite treats, assaulted Naruto's senses, threatening to overwhelm him. He loved to feel her soft skin in his hands again, greatly missing it for the past over 100 since she was taken from him. Kami, how he missed this. Before they could get any further lost in each other, a nearby cough made them break apart with a speed that would have made the fourth Hokage's famous Hiraishin jealous, something Naruto could attest to. A red-faced Sakura and a slightly pink Naruto refused to look at the other as they found the origin of the cough was from one red-face Iruka Amino. Now that you two are no longer lost in the other, shall we continue? Iruka questioned in annoyance without making eye contact with the two, deeply embarrassed by witnessing their shockingly hot and steamy kiss for their age. Ino ignored Iruka as she glared at a volcano-red Sakura who tried to sinking into her chair to avoid the look's other seething jealousy and rage. Hinata just shook her head in exasperation while thinking about the fact she had to talk to both Ino and Sakura about a law she had found for clans with one remaining member. What joy that would be, especially if they felt the same way as she did about the blonde baka. Iruka coughed again to compose himself before speaking to the entire class. Today marks the day where you could take on the Konoha forehead protector and become shinobi. I have the utmost confidence that most, if not all of you will pass the test and become genin. Whatever the outcome, I just want you to know that it has been a pleasure to teach each and every one of you. The whole class listened with rapt attention, quite the contrast to how they would normally respond to one of his lectures. Now, he said as he walked towards the door and held it open. The first portion of the exam is taijutsu, follow me to the field. Mizuki is already out there waiting. The class were quick to fall in after their sensei, blood pumping and ready for anything. Training ground behind the academy. The class walked to the back of the academy talking among one another excitedly, the intimate moment shared between Sakura and Naruto all but forgotten by most of the students. Except a select few. Ino walked close to Sakura firing a multitude of questions like, how did it feel? And, what did it taste like? Even the, will he do that to me if it ask? At such a rapid rate it was hard to answer before the next one came. Hinata, who was walking with the pair while looking at the back of Naruto as he walked and talked with Shikamaru and Choji, his best friends, just shook her head at the pair. Soon, Iruka came to a stop and turned to face the class, promoting them to do the same. The class soon crowed around their sensei for the last 3 years, all of them taking notice of the other figure that walked up to stand next to Iruka. Naruto narrowed his eyes as his right hand twitched so slightly that even a Sharingan would have trouble picking up the movement. Mizuki, he growled in his mind as the silver-haired shinobi came to a stop while flashing the class a warm and friendly smile, but Naruto could see the sick gleam in his eyes, especially when they locked gazes. No matter what Naruto did, Mizuki was always against him for what he used to hold in his gut. He was one of the more vocal, fox demon brat haters, no matter what he tried. Alright, called out Iruka, gathering the attention of his chatting students. As you all know, today is the day of the genin exams. The first test is a taijutsu test, as I said in the classroom. In this test you will have to go up against Mizuki-senpai. He indicated to the silver-haired man beside him, who waved at the class. And last for a minimum of 3 minutes. We will be judging you on your stance and any opening you may have. He looked down to the clipboard in his hand before clearing his throat and looking back up at his excited class. We will be starting in alphabetical order, so with that said let's start with Aburame, Shino. A brown spiky-haired boy walked forward from the back. He was wearing a beige coat with pockets that he liked to rest his hands in almost all the time and black glasses covering his eyes, normally emotionless eyes. Gray pants and black shinobi sandals. The student body parted like the Red Sea as the class creep walked to the rain. Naruto gave the Aburame clan heir a pat on the shoulder as he passed him, giving his silent support to his friend. Shino looked at Naruto out of the corner of his eyes and gave him a nod of thanks. Naruto chuckled as he retreated back to stand by Shikamaru's side, nudging the lazy boy every now and then to keep his friend awake. He sat back to observe the oncoming matches with a keen eye. I wonder if Sakura, Ino and Hinata are gonna beat the crap out of Mizuki Teme. He thought eagerly as he pictured the broken and beaten form of the blinded by Hei Chunin. Whatever happens, he thought as Shino landed a solid kick into side of Mizuki, sending the man stumbling before he corrected himself. This is gonna be fun, he said out loud, making a few people near him shake their head at his childlike behavior. One of which was Sasuke Uchiha, though if one were to look close enough, they would have seen a slight smile on his normally dark and moody face. "Dear Cammy, I can already imagine the fangirl's screams." 56 minutes later. Well, thought Naruto as he sighed to himself after watching one of Sasuke's fangirls get beaten after just a few hits, not wanting to get her hair messed up anymore. At least my Heims put up a good fight, and they truly did. The Pink Princess Sakura's match didn't last too long as she used her own self-made, with the help of Naruto, taijutsu style called Dancing Deadly Cherry Blossom. Not very creative in its name but correct in its description. The style relied on the user dancing around the attacks of their opponents and delivering strong and precise blows to the body, breaking bones and shattering bodies. Mizuki charged at Sakura with genin-level speeds, becoming a blur to most of the untrained students there but not the pink-haired girl. All she did was her fist while unconsciously channeling chakra into her fist, like she had to do to make Naruto feel anything at all. She dodged the strike to her face by twisting her head to the side and slammed her fist into the stomach of the off-balanced Mizuki, making him spit up blood and saliva while flying to the far wall, cracking the solid concrete of the building. So a shocked Iruka called match, and a medic, as Sakura walked toward a cheering Naruto and Ino while Hinata just clapped in happily with a smile on her face because of her friend's victory. She walked up to Naruto with looking in his eyes, playing with the dirt on the ground, timidly asking whether or not she did good. Naruto just smiled his foxy smile and wrapped her up in a warm hug, whispering a loving, "Congratulations," in her ear. Sakura, despite being a lovely shade of red in the face, just placed her head on his chest as flashes of what occurred between them earlier in the classroom filled her mind. Ino just glared at the pair in jealousy and she clenched and unclenched her hand, trying to calm herself. Hinata just patted the girl's shoulder, making Ino release a sigh of defeat. Next was the Hyuga princess. Hinata made good use of her clan taijutsu style, Gentle Fist, a style that makes use of the user's chakra by forcing it into their opponent's chakra pathways, targeting one or two of their tenketsu points with a series of blows, inflicting extreme internal damage to the body and potentially destroying the nearby organs, all done with only a single tap of a user's finger. Quite the formidable and deadly style of taijutsu, gives meaning to the saying, "Fighting Hyuga hand-to-hand is just a death wish," something that's made most of the Hyuga clan quite arrogant, thinking they were unbeatable. Hinata's fight only lasted 1 minute 30 seconds because Hinata closed a few tenketsu points in both Mizuki's arms and legs, rendering him a motionless sack of potatoes on the floor. Hinata had walked away from that fight with her head held high and a smile on her lips as Mizuki laid groaning and moaning on the floor. Naruto made sure to give her an extra big hug for that, something she was vocally happy about. The last one remaining to fight was Ino because her name started with a Y, meaning she would be one of the last to step up. Naruto was broken out of his thoughts when the voice of Iruka called out, "Next up, Uchiha Sasuke," and had to cover his ears as squeals and giggles assaulted his hyper-powered senses. He huffed as Sakura giggled by his side at his misfortune. The last loyal Uchiha brushed off the screams of affection and requests of dates as he walked up with his hands in his pockets and a scowl on his face. He stopped just opposite to the grinning Mizuki. His stance soon shifted into the classic interceptor fist style of the Uchiha clan that relies on predicting the enemy's movements and countering them. The style could only be used to its full potential when used in conjunction with the Uchiha bloodline, the Sharingan. Something Sasuke was not in possession of yet. The two looked at each other, studying their opponent's form. Sasuke noticed a series of obvious openings in Mizuki's stance, probably to give students a chance, but they're far too many to actually seem to present any type of challenge whatsoever. Mizuki struck first, like he did with every student so far, running up to Sasuke with his genin speed. Sasuke tensed his muscles, ready to act as soon as Mizuki was close enough. Time ticked as Mizuki approached the still Sasuke, just as the silver-head Chunin was about to lash out with a right hook. The dark-haired Uchiha stuck out his foot, tripping the charging sensei like an adult would a child. Sasuke reached into his pouch with shocking speed and pulled out a kunai, the metal shining as the sun hit the steel. He followed down after Mizuki and held the kunai at his throat, while narrowing his dark eyes at the squirming form of his sensei. Sasuke let out the signature, HN, of the Uchiha clan as Iruka called the match in his favor. He sheathed his kunai in his pouch again and out his hands in his pockets while slowly walking away from the ring to stand on his own. The screams and squeals of the fangirls grew in volume as the cool and hot Sasuke walked away while Mizuki pulled himself up with a hidden scowl. Shikamaru raised his head, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hands while yawning. "Troublesome females," he complained, blinking the remaining sleep out of his eyes while stretching. He suddenly froze as a frightening feeling washed all over him, his head slowly to look over his shoulder with a squeak. His face broke out in a nervous sweat as the darkly grinning forms of Ino and Sakura stood above him, both having that look in the eye while cracking their knuckles menacingly. "Wait a minute," he threw his hands up to hopefully diffuse the situation. "I'm saying that fangirls are troublesome, not all girl. Even if they are," he bit back the wince at his poor choice of words and the sound of grinding teeth. Well that's not what I meant." You see," Shikamaru's eyes darted all over the place to try and see any way out of his tense predicament. His eyes soon locked with the positively glowing blue of Naruto's as he looked at him in amusement. "Naruto!" he yelled out in mock friendliness as he let out a nervous chuckle while the two continued to stalk towards the lazy Nara while he called out to one of his childhood friends as he knew Choji was going to next to no help here. Said friend was just sat there happily munching on his bag of chips. "Naruto, you gotta help me, man. Get your crazy chicks in line or something, man." He could see the look of laughter die in Naruto's eyes and all that remained was fear and pity. Naruto shook his head in despair as he looked at Shikamaru in pity. He slowly raised his hand to the shaking Nara. He showed 3 fingers to the lazy shinobi in training, "That makes 3 Shika. I'm afraid I can't do anything for you now. You have been a good friend and it has been a pleasure knowing you." He and Choji closed their eyes and put their hand over their heart in a mock sort of send-off for a dead comrade. The girls smirked as they advanced towards the shaking form Shikamaru, ignoring his cries of "traitors" and "what happened to leave no man behind." "Uzumaki," Naruto called Iruka as he sent his little brother a supportive smile, completely missing the sick and twisted look in Mizuki's eyes as Naruto made his way to the ring. But not before Hinata dragged him to her by the arm. "Good luck, Naruto-kun," Hinata whispered in his ear. Just as Naruto was about to pull away, Hinata kissed him on the cheek with pink on her own. Naruto stood there with wide eyes as Hinata pulled away and turned to sit down to watch his match. Before she did, however, she sent the shocked but happy Naruto a slightly flirtatious smile as her eyes twinkled in amusement at his reaction. Naruto snapped out of his daze and shook his head slowly, a fond smile on his face as he made his way to stand across from the battle-ready Mizuki. "That's my Heim," he thought to himself as he got into his own loose stance, ready to lay the smack down on the anger-blind teacher. "Even now I can see the rage and hate in his eyes." Naruto sighed as he looked at Mizuki, seeing the crazed look on his face. Iruka looked from one to the other as they glared at each other. He shook his head as he raised his arm high into the air. Naruto just looked ahead with a lazy stance and look, as if this would be no trouble to stomp out the more experienced Chunin. "Who they think is more experienced?" Mizuki almost growled out in rage as he looked at Naruto. Was this kid really that why? Just because he was the Kyuubi reincarnated doesn't mean he was strong enough to not take him seriously. He would beat that brat into submission and show him who was boss. Mizuki's mind was so deluded that it actually seemed plausible to him, just like the idea of Naruto actually being the Kyuubi. Iruka brought his hand down, calling the beginning of the match. "You may start," he sent Naruto a nod of good luck, something the blonde boy smiled his thanks to. Mizuki wasted no time in rushing at the bored-looking boy at high genin to low chunin speeds, making him seemingly disappear to most of the class. Only the heirs, heiresses, Iruka and of course Naruto could keep up. Naruto just looked at the rapidly PFFT, yeah right, approaching Mizuki. Naruto could see the dark and slightly insane look in his eyes. He shook his head in defeat. There really was no changing people like this. Too blind in their hate to really see what was right in front of them. Though, mused Naruto as he dodged Mizuki's sloppy rage-filled strike and grabbed his wrist in a steel-like grip, feeling the bones in his grasp groan, just like the person they were in. Those type of people are the most fun to prank. He gave the arm in his hold a vicious tug and let go, making his silver-haired Chunin stumble forwards. Right into Naruto's brutal spinning heel kick, the force shattering Mizuki's jaw into hundreds of bone fragments. His neck snapped to the side and his body soon followed afterwards, sending him flying back at a startling speed, faster than when he rushed at Naruto. The crowd didn't know what happened. One moment Mizuki was rushing Naruto, then the next he was fly the opposite direction as Naruto stood in the same place only with his right leg raised as if he get kick something. Naruto took a deep breath as he lowered his legs slowly and looked at the stunned speechless Iruka, who stood there mouth open wide just like he was when Naruto showed off his new look. The blonde took a side glance to the rest of the class to see them in the same state as Iruka was. Is it really that shocking to see the dead last knock out a Chunin with one kick at speeds faster than they could follow? After all, deception is a ninja's bread and butter. Naruto cleared his throat while looking at his older brother expectantly, waiting for him to do his job. Iruka blinked owlishly, trying to comprehend what he had just seen. Well, Naruto Uzumaki, you passed the taijutsu test with flying colors. He looked towards the twitching form of Mizuki as blood dripped down out of his mouth at an alarming rate. It seems that because of you I now have be the one to test the skills of the remaining students. He sighed as he rubbed his temples when he saw Naruto's sheepish face as he rubbed the back of his head. Just go sit back down, Iruka sighed again as he looked at who was next on his board, absent-mindedly taking note of Ino as she rushed Naruto to hug the boy. He shook his head with a fond smile. Naruto was a natural when it came to talking to ladies, or anyone really. At his young age, he already had 3 stunningly beautiful girls all pining for his affections. It made him wonder just how many would fall to the boyish charm that Naruto just seemed to ooze. He buried his thought as he called out one of the last 7 names, Wakata, Haruo. You're up next. Whatever happens with Naruto, he was grateful, no blessed was the right word, that the Hokage convinced him to become the teacher to Naruto. He blocked a punch aimed at his face with little to no effort on his part, and sent one of his own to his student. He was proud of what his student had become and what he would no doubt be. He saw the way the villagers looked at him nowadays and it brought him great joy to see their hate turn to acceptance one face at a time. Naruto Uzumaki was truly one of a kind. Few minutes later, Naruto, Sakura and Hinata all nodded and clapped with proud smiles as Ino lasted the full 3 minutes against Iruka, landing a few hits on the skilled academy teacher despite taking a few herself. Taijutsu was never really her strong point, but she was doing a lot better than she did in the last Genin exams, having forfeited to keep her looks to impress Sasuke-kun. God, was she a fangirl if Naruto ever saw one. He couldn't even begin to describe his happiness at her kicking her tendencies. To be honest, that was one of the reasons Inoichi, Ino's father, probably liked him. Along with Sakura's dad, despite his wife's obvious disdain to the blonde Jubi. Iruka just watched in silence as the class talked and congratulated each other with a fond smile. After a few minutes he brought his fist up to his mouth and coughed loudly to get everyone's attention. His smile soon dropped as the class ignored him and continued to talk amongst themselves. His left eye twitched dangerously as a tick mark appeared on his forehead, his face coloring a rageful red. His head suddenly grew to an epic size as he roared out, "Shut up, you bakas." The force of his voice made his students grab onto anything near them to stop them from being blown away, though it did blow away their will to speak as the irate Iruka calmed himself down. "Now," he said with a soft and warm smile on his face again, seeing as Mizuki is still in the nurse's room from that blow to the jaw. He glared at a nervous Naruto who scratched the back of his head in embarrassment and shame that only grew when Hinata and Sakura shook their heads at him. "Let's go to the shrunken jutsu part of the exam." Iruka turned and walked away, not waiting for any type of answer as the class fell into step again. After a few minutes of walking, he came to a stop just in front of 3 pillars of wood with targets on them along with a large amount of crack and indentations. Like someone had thrown something at them repeatedly, which would be a correct assumption. "Now, you know what to do, but in case you have forgotten. You will be throwing 10 kunai and 5 shrunken at the targets at the end of the field, making the total you can hit being 15. The lowest you can score is 8, anything lower than I am afraid you will fail and have to stay back another year." He sent the class a sickening smirk that spoke of pain and misery as he finished his speech. "Like last time, we will be doing this in alphabetical order. Aburame Shino, you're up first." Naruto smirked as the silent boy walked to the front like last time, a plan already forming in his mind. He could already imagine the heat he was going to get from doing what he was about to do, but it was going to be worth it. Because, no matter how old he will become, he was a prankster at both heart and soul. Beside, you know what they say, once a prankster, always a prankster. Naruto lived by that saying. He blocked out most of the civilian students he did, however, take note of the fact that at least 7 pass while the rest failed almost spectacularly, except Sakura, who passed with a decent 12. But just like he expected, all of the clan kids got the average minimum of 10. Only Hinata, Ino, Sasuke and Naruto got 15. Sasuke's turn shocked a lot of people watching as he threw all 10 kunai at once, followed by the 5 shrunken in the same fashion. He had brushed off all the praise sent his way with a wide but cold smile, but only Naruto could see the challenge in the dark-haired boy's eyes. Let it be known that Naruto Uzumaki never backs down from a fight, so with squared shoulders and a ramrod back, he channeled his wind-styled chakra, a hard feat to do seeing as the equipment provided weren't made for element manipulation. The weapons glowed a bright blue, making the students who didn't know confused while the people that did just looked on in shock and surprise. Naruto hid his foxy smile from everyone as he threw the weapons just like Sasuke without even grunting. The kunai cut through the air at blurring speeds, leaving a blue trail in their wake. The entire class just looked on with wide eyes as the kunai impacted the wooden pillars on the bullseye and tore right through the sturdy post, sending splinters everywhere, but the kunai didn't stop. They continued on until they were buried up to the hilt in the stone 6 meters behind the 3 now shattered targets. Everyone just stared with eyes wide as Naruto stood there with a smug grin and his hands on his hips. The 3 ice princesses were the first to get over the shock, having gotten used to these things after knowing Naruto for the past 6 years. Even if seeing him control his element at such a young was astounding, it was becoming the norm of seeing him do things that shouldn't be possible. Beside, what's next? Him being able to take on a tailed beast one-on-one? Yeah right, that sounded completely asinine, and it wasn't possible for one person to fight one of the 9 Biju anyway. After the whole class had their turn at showing their skills at shrunken jutsu, Iruka had led them inside for the finale stretch of the exam. He could almost see the nerves building up in some of the more unprepared students, the ones that never bothered to actually train. Once everyone was sat back down in their classroom seats, Iruka got to work on quickly marking down everything that had happened in the last hour, especially Naruto's sudden burst in skill and shocking display of chakra control and manipulation when he fed it through normal metal weapons. Most full-grown ninja would have trouble doing what he did with weapons designed for that type of use. Right, called Iruka as he looked up from his board, having put down the latest results for each student. The last portion of this exam is all about ninjutsu. Just like last time, I will call your name and you will follow me into this room where you will show me the 3 academy jutsu. The Kawarimi no Jutsu or Substitution Jutsu, the Bunshin no Jutsu or Clone Jutsu, and the Henge no Jutsu or Transformation Jutsu. He walked over to the door, holding it open as he called out the first student's name. Once again, Aburame Shino, would you please join me in the next room? Iruka waited patiently as the heavily covered boy strolled out of the open door. Just as Iruka was about to follow him, he turned towards the remaining students and sent them a glare. Everyone will stay in this room until their name is called. His glare intensified as he spotted the innocently whistling Naruto. Is that understood? He asked in a stiff and firm tone, leaving no room for disagreement. Naruto just continued to try and look innocent, but the look was whipped of his face as a hand struck the back of his head with a decent amount of force, sending his face into the desk with a crash. He didn't even have to look for him to know whose hand it was as he groaned out a weak. Was that really necessary, Ino-chan? His only response was a low growling noise as his head was pushed farther down into the wood of the desk. Okay, get off me you crazy women, fine. He looked up at the smug-looking Iruka as he bit out a reluctant, yes Iruka-sensei, like the rest of the class. The scarred Chunin just nodded with a smug smile as he shut the door, leaving the class to wait for the last test. The one that tended to make it or break it. Most were calm and cool, talking to their friends as if this was just another day, while others seemed to be shaking in either fear and nervousness or in giddiness and excitement. Naruto was of the first category. While his chakra control was nowhere near perfect enough for delicate work like medical ninjutsu, it was still amazing for someone with the amount of chakra he had inside of him. Patience was never really his strong suit though. What could he do while he waited? Suddenly an idea popped into his head, making him giggle mischievously and move to get up. He was stopped by a firm and strong yet gentle grip on his arm. He looked over to see a far too sweetly smiling Hinata with her eyes closed. He started to sweat. He never liked that look on his Hyugaheim, princess. It normally meant pain if he didn't comply. So without her even have to say a word, Naruto was quick to take his seat again as sweat dripped off his face like a waterfall. He was relived when Hinata gave him a nod of acceptance and turned to talk to Ino and Sakura again. Naruto sighed in frustration, but his face had a fond and happy smile. Just like when we were married. Hinata always was the dominaton in the little collective we had going on. Naruto chuckled to himself as a past memory came up. Even if she wasn't the oldest, she could tame most anyone with that smile of hers. He shivered remembrance, fearing the man times he had seen that smile. Hinata suddenly felt a smug pride enter her body, like she had thoroughly told off someone from doing something incredibly stupid. She just shrugged it off however and continued to listen as Ino told her and Sakura about a recurring dream she had been having about a metal cord, a piece of glass and a rubber duck of all things. Naruto sighed in boredom as he sunk back into his seat and closed his eyes. What was he gonna do for the next untold amount of time? He was the great Naruto Uzumaki Naruto and he would figure something out. 1 hour and 27 minutes later. A nap. A nap was what the great Naruto Uzumaki came up with, resting the eyes, slowing the brain or have some beauty sleep. Whatever you want to call it. Ino just watched with a small smile as the blonde Jubi snoozed in his seat, drool dripping down his chin to the hard wooden desk. After Hinata and Sakura had been called, the two had decided to go and train, their new forehead protectors displayed proudly on their neck and right thigh respectively, leaving the two blondes alone with a few others in the class. Though Naruto was fast asleep, leaving her alone with no one she liked to talk to. She sighed to herself as she looked at the object of her affections, his blonde and silver hair almost shining as the light hit it, her fingers twitched with want. Devilishly handsome when he is awake, flashing his foxy grin, unbelievingly cute when his is asleep, she sighed to herself again, eyes shining with adoration as Naruto seemed to burrow farther into his crossed arms where he had laid his head. Ino was awoken from her daydreaming while Naruto jolted up from his actual dreaming when the door slammed open with a loud bang as a smiling Iruka walked in. "Naruto, you up next?" he called as he looked at the blonde and silver-haired boy, who hastily wiped the drool of his with a sheepish smile. Iruka just shook his head in exasperation, holding the door open as he motioned for Naruto to go through. Ino watched as Naruto stood up with a conflicted look in her eyes. She took a deep breath as she came to a decision. Before Naruto rushed off to Iruka, Ino pulled him to her with a strong tug. Naruto yelped out and shook, and before he knew it, a pair of soft lips were planted on his cheek. Naruto turned a lovely shade of red, a color Ino seemed to match. It wasn't a second later that Ino pulled away whispering a small but happy, "Good luck," as she sat down, refusing to look at the stock-still Naruto. She turned her head to the side to look out the window with her arms crossed under her chest, painfully aware of the looks she was getting from the remaining people in the class. Naruto walked away in a daze, his hand raised to his cheek. His fingers traced the pink lipstick mark on his cheek, the pink blending well with the scarlet of his face. He passed Iruka, absent-mindedly picking up on the barely suppressed laughter from the scared teacher. Before Iruka closed the door, Naruto looked over his shoulder at Ino. The two locked eyes for a split second before the two looked away again, their faces alight more than before. Well then, thought Naruto as he shook his head side to side, a smile slowly forming on his face. Ain't that something? Long ago memories flashed in his head, thinking on his past life before everything was taken from him. Ino did that before we got together last time as well. He brought a finger to his chin as he fell into step with Iruka, ignoring the teasing aimed his way by the Chunin. Wonder if this could mean the same in this time around, he chuckled at the thought. After having that kiss with Sakura, he knew the talk was coming soon. Last time he had that talk with the girls, there were a lot of sharp objects that wanted to take away his ability to carry on his clan. Not a pleasant experience that he was looking forward to going through again. The two of them walked to the room where the final part of the exam was meant to take place, one trying to ignore the other continuous prodding and poking to get a reaction. Soon the pair came to a stop in a lightly colored wooden room with a single table littered with dozens of blue-clothed Konoha forehead protectors and a lone chair to the left of said table. Iruka walked over to the table then turned to talk to the only other person in the room. This test would normally be done with 2 overseers, but seeing as Mizuki is still unconscious from that kick to the jaw earlier. That was a very strong and well-placed kick, by the way, well done. Anyway, I will be doing this test on my own. Naruto gave a nod of confirmation at the information given to him, hiding the satisfaction from the damage he had done to the silver-haired Teme. Okay, first you will show me the Kawarimi no Jutsu. Iruka looked over his board with a pen in his hand, ready to mark down Naruto's scores. Naruto nodded again, as his chakra reached out to the nearest object he was able to switch with. In this case it was the lone chair in the room, probably there of this reason. Suddenly, Naruto and the chair had switched places, without any hand signs, smoke or even a noise. Iruka started to write quickly as Naruto appeared back to the place he was before, like he hadn't even moved at all. Jutsu 1. The Kawarimi no Jutsu. Quickly used. No smoke. No hand signs. Didn't have to call the name of the jutsu as he performed it. Result. Mastered it to a level far beyond the requirement need. Iruka wrote down as fast as he could, astounded by his, secretly, favorite student's display. After a few seconds, Iruka looked up at the stoic Naruto who stood there with his arms crossed, waiting for the next part. Okay, the next one is the Bunshin no Jutsu. He sent Naruto a worried and comforting look at the same time, a weird combo really. Don't worry if you can't do this one, okay Naruto? With your results from the rest of the exam, you will pass with flying colors. Iruka reached out to pat Naruto's shoulder, like a supportive big brother would. Naruto just smirked at the scarred Chunin, his hand flying into a cross sign in front of his middle and index fingers on both hands pointing out. He called out one of his more favorite and useful out of his massive arsenal of jutsus. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Naruto carefully molded the required amount of chakra to only produce his minimum at the moment of 5 clones. He didn't really need the hand sign to do the jutsu, but he always felt slightly badass while doing it. The room was filled with smoke as 5 identical Naruto, all wearing the same grin, popped into existence besides the original. Iruka looked on with wide eyes, his mind slowly trying to comprehend what had just happened. Finally his mouth started working along with his brain as he sputtered out a stunned, "Naruto, that's an A- rank forbidden jutsu. How do you even know about that jutsu, let alone be able to use it?" He was truly stunned. That was a dangerous jutsu that most full-grown shinobi could use, and yet, here was a 12-year-old boy, not even out of the academy yet, using it like it was nothing. He wasn't even sweating, nor did his breathing pattern change in the slightest. He used it like he'd been using it since he was a child. The main reason it was an A- rank forbidden jutsu was because of the absolutely massive amount of chakra required to even make 1 clone, let alone 5. Plus, the hidden feature of the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu was the memory feedback once a clone's life was used up. Most would use this as a way of boosting training time up exponentially, making a day's worth of training into a year's worth if enough clones were used. Not a bad idea at all, until you count in the dangerously high chance of brain damage from having so many memories rammed into your head. So seeing a child perform this type of jutsu like it was nothing was quite the startling experience. All 6 of the Narutos just chuckled as they rubbed the back of their heads in sync before 5 vanished in another puff of smoke, leaving the original standing there on his own, his grin still plastered on his face. Inu Oni-san showed it to me when he saw that I couldn't do the normal Bunshin no Jutsu because of my giant chakra reserves. Not a lie but not the truth. Seeing as Inu did indeed show him the jutsu, Naruto did however know it before it was showed to him, so Kakashi seemed to take a bigger role in his life this time around for some reason, becoming something of an older brother to the secretly over century-old Uzumaki. Iruka just shook his head at the information. Of course it was Kakashi. The two were seen around the other so often and acted just like a family. Just like before, Iruka started to write down the necessary things need to pass the blonde. Okay then, Jutsu 2. The Bunshin no Jutsu. Naruto Uzumaki was unable to perform the standard clone jutsu but was able to use the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu with little to no effort. Able to produce an astounding 5 clones, much better than the required 2. Overall results, much better than predicted, pass. Iruka concluded with a giant smile on his face, proud of the skills Naruto was suddenly displaying. Okay, so finally we have the Henge no Jutsu. Transform into anything you can, okay Naruto. Start whenever you are ready. Naruto nodded as he was covered by a plume of smoke. Iruka braced himself for any more surprises from the blonde and silver boy, expecting the theme of today to carry on even now. He however was not ready for what he saw when the smoke cleared. Yandere-sama, he almost shouted in shock, his eyes wide at the ghost of Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage, in front of him. Because stood there was the spitting image of the face on the mountain. Long shoulder-length spiky golden hair, much like Naruto's new style but without the silver highlights, check. Calm and cool azure blue eyes that could turn even more icy than a glacier in the winter, again just like Naruto's, cheek. Angular face that attracted a lot of female attention when the man was younger, one more just like Naruto's own face despite the lack of whiskers, cheek. Everything was spot on, the white cloak with red flames, the green Junin flak jacket over a full blue bodysuit. Iruka-san, even the voice was spot on, having heard it a few times when he was a child. Iruka snapped to attention, the voice was so full of strength, authority and the ever-present kindness that it almost made him think that the fourth Hokage never did that night 12 years ago. I believe that if one does not understand what it feels like to fight, not for themselves but to fight for their loved ones and family, then they do not possess the will of fire. As Hokage, I have the whole village to protect, they are my family. We must do our best to protect the future of this village, the children. We must nurture them and to help them grow into great people to lead when he pass on. You have do a great job as a teacher, Iruka-san. Please, never lose your own personal will of fire, and continue to teach the next generation of ninja. You are a true shinobi. His word brought a great joy to the scared Chunin, as he nodded a firm yes. Iruka was knocked out of his stiff, ramrod stance when the softly smiling form of the blonde Yandere was covered from view by a cloud of fluffy gray. Soon the smoke cleared to show Naruto from before. Iruka blinked, his mind slowly taking in the change. He couldn't, however, knock the painfully obvious similarities between his favorite student and the yellow flash of Konoha. An idea was quick to pop into his mind, one he shook off as soon as it appeared. No, he thought with a small scoff. Naruto couldn't be related to the Yandere. The third Hokage would have told the entire village if that was the case, he concluded with a firm nod, completely sure with his thoughts' outcome. But no matter how hard he tried, he could almost feel the niggling feeling at the back of his mind. What if that wasn't the case? Naruto chuckled to himself as he watched the sea of emotions cross Iruka's eyes. He was well aware of what his sensei was thinking about. After a few minutes of silently watching, Naruto saw Iruka nod to himself slightly, seemingly coming to a conclusion. So Iruka-sensei, he gave the Chunin a foxy grin, his eyes positively sparkling with mirth. Do I pass? He asked as innocently as he could, but the entire image was ruined by the grin still stuck on his face. Iruka coughed to himself as he reached out to the table next to him, his fingers wrapping around the cold metal of Naruto's achievement. He looked at the leaf insignia engraved into the metal with a fond smile. He turned to Naruto, his smile still on his face as he held the forehead protector close to his chest. It gives me great joy to hand one of these out to a student that I have taught from the past few years. He looked down at the universal sign of a ninja's willingness to serve his or her village. But with you, it feels different. It's like seeing you little brother finally overcome something and becoming a man. Iruka looked up at the stunned Naruto, with a happy smile and watery eyes. He held out the protector to the blonde, who grabbed it with robotic movement and shaky fingers. It is my greatest pleasure to present to you, Uzumaki Naruto, the Konohagakure Hite 8. You are a full-fledged shinobi now. Protect our village and its people with your life. He brought the newly minted, again, ninja into a brotherly hug as he whispered into his ear. I'm proud of you, Naruto. If you ask Kakashi, he probably will be too. Iruka pulled back and patted the blonde and silver-haired boy on the shoulder, a warm smile clear for anyone to see. Naruto raised the Hite 8 to his forehead, his sliver-tinted gold bags being pushed away from his face. He tied the cloth together behind his head, taking great joy in the familiar feeling. The light reflected off of the cool and untouched metal as Naruto wiped the tears from Iruka's speech away. He sent the Chunin a nod of both respect and gratitude, one which the teacher sent back happily. Now, thought Naruto as he walked out of the room, a small scheming grin making its way across his face. Time to set my plans into motion. He brought a finger to his chin in a mock-thinking pose, his eyes dancing with excitement. I hear Kirigakure is nice this time of year. I wonder how Mei-chan is nowadays. Naruto raised the Hite-8 to his forehead, his sliver-tinted gold bags being pushed away from his face. He tied the cloth together behind his head, taking great joy in the familiar feeling. The light reflected off of the cool and untouched metal as Naruto wiped the tears from Iruka's speech away. He sent the Chunin a nod of both respect and gratitude, one which the teacher sent back happily. Now, thought Naruto as he walked out of the room, a small scheming grin making its way across his face. Time to set my plans into motion. He brought a finger to his chin in a mock-thinking pose, his eyes dancing with excitement. I hear Kirigakure is nice this time of year. I wonder how Mei-chan is nowadays. On the outskirts of Kirigakure, thought Naruto as he hopped from tree branch to tree branch, not really paying attention but still acutely aware of his surrounding. The bloody mist, he continued to himself, closing his eyes, letting his instincts take over as he moved through the forest to his destination at a speed most would find hard to track, let alone keep up with. Boy did he hate that name, along with a lot of the ninja in the village. Or the ninja that were in the village anyway. The reason most hated that name was because of the, as you guessed, horrible things done to receive the name from its neighboring villages. The reason they were called such a grim name was because of what happened at the academy graduation exam. Now in most of the villages, the final exams to become ninja was a test in taijutsu, genjutsu, ninjutsu and a written test. This however isn't the case in the infamous village of the Bloody Mist. No, their graduation exam was much worse than having to sit a boring exam. Because of the day of their genin exam, the exam that they were taking with fellow students that they had been with since the beginning for the school. The same 12-year-old kids that had dreams and hopes, the same kids that had become friends, that same kids that ate together, fought together and learned together, were the same kids that the students were pitted against in a fight to the death. Not really a pleasant story, to be honest. Naruto shook his head to try and clear the horror stories he had been told to by Hot and Steamy Princess, along with the slightly wet eyes at the thought of being in the same situation and having to try and kill one of his 3 ice princesses. He couldn't even bear the thought. Now, while he might be the almighty and primordial Jubi, he was still Naruto. The same happy-go-lucky, cheerful and most unpredictable person around. No amount of time would change that about him. Because that him was the him that his ladies fell in love with, something he would cherish for the rest of his immortal life. Now that's a long time. Naruto snapped his eyes open as he came to a stop on one of the higher-up branches, he chakra and arms ready for anything. He looked to the right, his rapidly improving sensory abilities picking up on the quickly disappearing chakra sources, like they were flames being put out by a tidal wave of water. He clenched his hand as more and more just seemed to be snuffed out one by one. After a quick mental debate, something that should have taken longer than it did considering what he guessed was up ahead, Naruto willed his power of shadow to mold itself onto his face, covering his mouth and nose in a face mask but not hindering his ability to breathe at all. He reached back as the very same shadow added a pitch-black hood to his coat and pulled it over his easily recognizable golden and silver hair. Something he didn't want was being identified all the way out here when he was meant to be all the way back in Konoha doing the normal genin stuff with Sakura-chan, Kakashi ni-san and Sasuke, if everything went according to plan, that is, something his blood clone was doing for his cover. If he was caught out, boy would that raise a lot of questions he wasn't ready to answer yet. With his mind made up, Naruto vanished like a wrath, seemingly never there as he speeded towards the location of a no-doubt battle. The closer and closer he got, the fact that he was walking into a battle with unknown people became more and more apparent as the loud bang of explosions and yells of pain soon assaulted his enhanced hearing along with the metallic smell of fresh blood. He pushed chakra into his legs, speeding up even more than before, making the tree and branches bend as he ran past them. It wasn't even seconds later before he came to an abrupt halt, the wind catching up to him making a few tree bend and groan under the sudden force. Naruto, however, ignored all of that as his eyes narrowed with cold fury and his entire body went rigged with rage. The image in front of him being burning to his memory, never to leave until he made the person who did this suffer. Bodies of men, women and children, some no older than 2 laid strewn amounts burning and collapsing building. So were give a quick death by a single slash to the throat, from what he could tell, while others seemed to be tortured and even burned alive. Naruto closed his eyes and reached out to find something, anything that survived as horror filled his body. A small spark of hope to him over he detected 4 strong chakra signatures to his immediate left. He was just about to run over before a sick and manic laugh cackled along with the bonfire of a community, making uncertainty and uneasy boil inside him, along with anger. Naruto shrouded himself in his shadow-styled chakra nature as he sunk back into the shadows around him, making him completely invisible to the human eye, even the Sharingan and Byakugan, though it did little to cover smell. Naruto jumped, as it were, from tree shadow to tree shadow, finding them in abundance because of the great roaring fire not too far from where he was stood. He made his way to the source of the laughter and saw, like his sensing abilities suggested, 4 people. All 4 of them were male, from what Naruto could tell for fairly similar height. All wore the same gray body armor, brown hooded clothing, fingerless, elbow-length black gloves and open-toed shinobi-issue boots. That was not what drew Naruto's eye though, no, that privilege belonged to the standard-issue Kiri Anbu Black Ops mask covering their faces from Naruto now rageful red eyes. The pieces started to fall into place as the Tom in Naruto's now emotionally active Sharingan began to spin rapidly, a sign to anyone that knew an Uchiha that they were beyond pissed off. His eyes started to glow a hellish red, the great fire leaning over to his position slightly while the ground and wind around him seemed to shake in anticipation. Naruto noticed this and reined in his control, not wanting to reveal his position just yet. When he would though, all hell would break loose. He silenced himself as one of them stood into front of the rest, making the 3 of them quieten down. "Well boys." The apparent leader's voice was full of cheer, as if what he was looking at, along with the currently undetected Naruto, was something to celebrate. "It's my honor to call you 3 my students. Especially after that bloodline butcher raid, you didn't let even one of them got away. Though it was fun to see them try and run with their tails between their legs like the dogs they are." He chuckled darkly as the 3 before him broke out into laughter. "So the bloodline war is still on, is it?" questioned Naruto as he tried his hardest not to just jump out and kill the 4 sick bastards then and 3. "I wonder what clan the almighty Mizukage decided would be put to the sword now." He practically spat out the words Mizukage like it was poison. He knew damn well what the leaders of this village were like, none of them honorable. Only the Godem Mizukage was really worthy of the title with what she did in her reign and the prosperity she brought onto her village, thought Naruto with a soft look in his eyes, even if his face was still stone-like as he listened to the 4 celebrate. "Man," one whined as he sulked off to the side, drawing not only his team's attention, but also Naruto's deadly gaze. "Why did Mizukage-sama send us out to deal with these lot?" he complained as he looked at his leader. "All this clan did was use their bloodline to fertilize the soil. They didn't even put up a fight. When are we gonna fight someone again? It's been ages since I've seen anything from those pathetic rebels." He moaned childishly as his team chuckled at him, not realizing what he had just unleashed on himself and him team. Naruto grasped the hilt of Zenjutsu in a grip so strong his hand started to bloody the blade before it was even being used. His mouth twisted into a silent snarl, his elongated fangs bared like a feral animal. They weren't even a threat and yet, they killed them like they were nothing like rabid dogs. The whispers on his face darkened and became more profound. His eyes glowed crimson like 2 embers of fire floating in the air as his pupil morphed into a wolf-like slit, behind the group. What he didn't realize was that in his rage-clouded state, he had let a tiny fraction of his hidden godlike Jubi power slip through the normally steel grip along with a low growl, something the captain was barely able to hear. The team froze, their laughter dying in their throats as a dark feeling in the air seemed to crush them. They all tried to ignore the sweat dripping down their faces and cover their nervous shaking from each other. The leader couched into his hand, trying to gather himself along with getting the attention of his team. "Form up boys, we're gonna be moving to Kiri double time. I'm sure Mizukage-sama will generously reward us for this performance." He shuddered as the feeling grew more oppressive when he said performance. It took all of his years in the Anbu not to break and show his fear in front of his subordinates. The three, however, weren't so composed as their fearless leader seemed to be. "What the hell is this feeling?" questioned one of them as he fingered his weapon pouch, his voice dripping with fear as he looked around in the terror his comrades were trying to keep hidden. "I don't know," as the one to his left, his voice as emotionless as an Anbu Black Ops member should be, not showing the terror gripping his heart and a deadly hold. "But whatever it is, it's dangerous and very angry from what I can tell," he stated, getting a scoff from the last team member. The last one shook his head in disbelief, completely dumbfounded by his teammates' cowardice. "You two are pathetic," he scoffed as he crossed his arms. "Scared by something that doesn't have the balls to come out and fight us," he let out a sick laugh at his own joke, the same Naruto heard from before. The hidden Primordial let out his own dark chuckle, his voice projected from all different directions. He slowly took Zenjutsu from its sheath, the rasp of the blade being drawn, making the four Anbu draw their own weapons of choice and form a standard ambush defense formation. The nearby shadow started to twitch and spasm as a voice spoke up from the dark surrounding the back-to-back Anbu. "TCH, TCH, TCH. Silly little Anbu," Naruto mocked, his voice sending a shiver up the whole team's spines, making some of them grip their weapons tighter while all of them tried to swallow the lump in their throats. They all noticed the shadows seemed to move and converge onto one point. Once they all impacted, the very dark seemed to twist and rip as it shaped into a shrouded figure as tall as the most of them. The shadows seemed to wrap around the creature before them, as if they were waiting for his command. The only thing not covered in the dark of the night was the glowing red and black eyes as they glared with false amusement at the four shaking Anbu members, along with a black and red katana that he held in his right hand lazily. The team were broken out of their horror-filled daze as the figure spoke again, the voice distorted, as if two people were trying to talk at once. "At least your team fear me, little Anbu. You should have left after you sacked the family like a bunch of mindless brutes." He paused as the one that spoke up before formed the standard ram hand seal and flared his chakra with a shout of "Kai." Then did it again and again and again, getting more and more desperate with each try. Naruto snorted, then he chuckled before he broke out into a cold and mocking laugh, scaring the four into silence. "Silly little Anbu," Naruto mocked as he whipped a fake tear from his face, taking great pleasure in the feeling of terror from each of them. A small little piece of revenge for the clan they're butchered like a bunch of animals. "This is no genjutsu," Naruto locked his crimson glare onto their masks' eye slits, as if looking right into their souls. "This is reality, this is real," he declared in a strong voice as his appointed whip of shadow rose from the ground and started to move around him, slowly sawing back and forth. "Here," he called out in a fake cheerful tone to the four as they tensed at the sight of the strange jutsu, their kunai and swords at the ready. "Let me prove it to you." Without even a twitch or movement from its creator, the limb of shadow shot forward towards the group of four with startling speed. Three jumped back away, trying to get space between them and the target as well as avoiding the strange attack. One, however, wasn't so lucky as he stood rooted to the spot, fear keeping him planted in place as the black spear aimed at him. The black and ashy ground got a new coat of red as the Anbu member was lifted into the air like he was nothing. The cloaked shinobi let loose a blood-curdling scream as he stared down at the cause of his pain. He withered in agony as his body was swallowed by darkness. His cries of pain and fear were suddenly cut off as he slumped, all life leaving his body. The remaining three looked on in horror as their teammate's body was flicked to the side like yesterday's trash. A trail left behind from the gaping hole where his stomach should be, his body landing with a thud on the ground not to the left, not that far away. "Damn," muttered the captain as he looked at his fallen subordinate. "He got Tanuki, Badger." He didn't have time to mourn now, he could do that later at the base when he and the others took out this freak. Even if that chance was little to none. Naruto scoffed in disappointment while looking at the corpse, barely taking notice of his whip of shadow returned to his side. "This is what classifies as Anbu in your village? The top shinobi? Ha! What a joke." He taunted, hoping to get a reaction from at least one of the three. He almost laughed when the Y1 from before gave him just what he wanted. "Bastard," he yelled as he raised his sword above his head and rushed forward, the brutal death of his teammate and the insult to his home clouding his better judgment and blocking the voice of his captain. Naruto shook his head as his shadow rushed to his defense from the danger-blind Anbu. The ninja tried for an overhead slash at the shadow and to his surprise continued to go through as if nothing was ever there. The red-tipped spear shot around his neck and tightened to an increasable degree. The trapped shinobi dropped his sword as his hands grabbed at the thing coiled around his windpipe and tried desperately to get it off to allow him room to breathe. He felt his feet leave the earth as the shadow held him in the air like he was a newborn and pull him to the demon attacking his squad. He clawed at the shadow as he dangled face to face with the shadow-shrouded creature, his eyes looking straight into the hypnotically spinning crimson and black eyes of his soon-to-be killer. His eyes widened behind his mask as pale blue lightning sparked to life in the monster's left hand. Despite the new source of light, his form stayed covered by wisps of dark he seemed to control. The being slowly brought his hand up as curled his thumb in, leaving his 4 fingers outstretched in a stabbing position. Then all he knew was pain as Naruto's lightning-covered hand cut through his chest like a knife clean through and through. He looked into the eyes of his and his teammate's killer and managed to gargle out a weak Sharingan in warning to his captain and comrade in one last attempt at defiance as he, like his comrade, slumped in the grasp of the shadow before he was tossed aside, a hole where his heart should be. "Damn it," muttered the white-cloaked Anbu as he looked towards his last remaining teammate who stayed silent throughout the whole ordeal. Though with his trained and experienced eyes he could see the young man was shaking. Whether it was with fear because of the monster before them or rage at the death of his comrades he did not know. Things aren't looking too good, he thought to himself as he turned his head to the shadow demon who continued to stand there. His sword as black as his shadows to his side and his left hand and front coated in the blood of his fallen brother in arms who lay by the beast's feet. "I need to buy time for Lion, to alert HQ and Mizukage-sama about this guy." He looked to his left and signaled to the last Anbu member his plan with a series of Kiri hand signs. He received almost missed nod in confirmation of his orders as he focused all his attraction on the still motionless figure and his still moving shadow whip. "So, he got the famed Sharingan eye? Must be an Uchiha, but I thought only Itachi Uchiha only left one person alive after he killed his clan?" He knew his unspoken question would only continue to go unanswered, but he allowed himself this one moment before he rushed forward to meet his no-doubt end. He steadied his breathing and steeled his will while gripping his standard-issue Anbu ninjutsu a little bit tighter. "Who are you?" he asked tentatively, his sword held in a steady grip as he pointed the tip at his foe. Naruto tilted his head to the side as he let his shadows disperse in a show of black wisps of energy, showing his black and silver attire, hooded and mask face along with the gold and silver bag that fell down the right side of his face. He brought Zenjutsu up to his face and looked at it for a bit, ignoring the question. He knew they were stalling for time, but hey, what's life without a little fun? With twist of the wrist, he flipped the blade and caught the hilt in a reverse grip. "Me?" he asked, his voice losing its demonic tone as he brought his left hand up to chest level, the palm facing the right. He placed his feet shoulder-length apart as he held his sword behind his back, the razor-sharp blade facing outward. "Well, I am just one of the many that want this world to change." He sent the now duo a hidden behind the mask grin as his scarlet eyes spin faster than before. "But I am also one of the very small few who have the powers to make that happen," he declared as he kicked forward, sending dirt and dust everywhere behind him. He closed the distance in nothing more than a second. To the Anbu members, he seemingly disappeared before reappearing right in front of the captain, his sword already poised to slash. Their eyes widened behind their masks. To be able to just vanish from trained Anbu members using nothing by pure speed meant that that person had to have been going at least mid-cage levels. The captain forced his shook away as he willed his body to block the strike, which he did as their swords met in a shower of sparks. Naruto didn't let that stop his as he spun on his heel and kicked the man in the chest with enough force to make him skid back for a little bit and lose balance for a sec. But a second was all Naruto needed as he pushed the assault again, going in for a sideward slash aimed at the man's armored midsection. A slash that was quickly blocked by his opponent's own sword. Naruto spun around, a kunai appearing in his left hand from the seal on the back of his armored gauntlet. Ryan saw that, as did his captain who jumped back to avoid the throat slash by mere inches. Ryan didn't even need to be told what to do as he weaved a combination of hand signs before making an O with his index and thumb and bringing it up to his mouth while shouting out, "Water style, water bullet." He took a deep breath, his head tiled up slightly before he released all of his gathered up chakra in a stream of high-pressured water towards the stock-still Naruto, who watched the incoming attack with a dead eye. Naruto's Sharingan Tom spun as he brought his hand up to his mouth in a rain, muttering, "Fire style, Grand Fireball," before exhaling a ball of white fire as big as a house so hot that it turned the incoming water to steam and let ash in its wake. Ryan stopped his jutsu when it had no effect. Just as the great flaming sphere was about to hit him, he jumped high into the air. However, he was not expecting it to explode as violently as it did, making him unable to completely avoid the resulting storm of fire and flames. He landed with a thud not too far away, his entire right side smoking and covered in third-degree burns and groaning in pain, twitching in agony, slowly dying from blood loss. Naruto covered the wince of sympathy. He had done that to himself more times than he cared to admit while he was training in the more advanced fire-style techniques. He was an enemy though, and he would not show sympathy for those that would slaughter a clan of peaceful civilians just because they were bloodline scum. His thoughts were cut off as he leaned back slightly to avoid a sloppy overhead slash from his right. He continued to dodge sloppy anger-fueled attack after attack before he decided enough was enough and caught the blade in between his fingers. He channeled his lightning-styled chakra through the blade, sending a high amount of voltage into the Anbu's body, who yelled out in pain. Naruto shook his head as he yawned and with a jerk, shattered the blade and sent the man down to the ground, lightning sparking off his body randomly. He sheathed his sword as he clicked his tongue in disappointment, expecting a better battle from a village's elite shinobi. He looked down at the Anbu member, he could feel the glare through the mask. Naruto tutted again as he crouched down beside the paralyzed shinobi's head and drew another kunai, the metal shining as some of the nearby fire hit it. "People like you don't deserve mercy," he said as if he was talking about the weather, twirling his blade by the ring-style pummel. "But no one truly deserves to suffer. Oh, and by the way, I was never going to allow your little dead friend over there escape to tell you little loyal friends about me. I'm still an unknown player and would like to keep it that way." His crimson eyes bled as they shifted into his natural breathtaking eye color. The last thing the wounded shinobi saw was the startling blue before his world went black, kicking himself for not listening to his gut when he felt that today was gonna be a bad day. Naruto sighed as he cleaned his kunai of blood on the grass before it disappeared in a puff of smoke, signaling him sealing it back into his pocket dimension. He stood up and coughed, turning his head to the left, his eyes lazily looking into the seemingly empty tree line. Might as well come out now, rebels. To anyone else, they would thought the disguised Jubi was insane. Until they saw the 5 people walk out into the clearing. 4 male and 1 female. The female almost made lock up as he had to force down the impulse to rush up and bring her into his arms. Run his hands through her long red knee-length hair, kiss her pink lustrous lips and take her out of her blue battle dress just the way she liked. Though he did allow him the moment to remember her name in blissful peace as the memories threatened to overtake him and break character. Mayhem. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.